be interested in just finishing my conversation with JC, it'd only take like 5 minutes. I can just raise the objection and pick up where we left off. But to be honest with you, if you guys, like, for example, the butt touchers like Joe Vaughn, Michael, Tom, all these well-known trolls, if they're going to keep attacking me, then I'd, to be honest with you, I would just rather go into a room with JHC alone so like these people don't get so fucking offended by our discussion. Because these idiots, these fucking idiots are in my DMs. Like, that's how fucking, I'm dealing with a bunch of grown children
so
here.
upset, JonJon.
Like, they're
just everybody just stop talking. JHC, ask your question. Go ahead.
JonJon, did you prefer to go to another room?
Only if people are going to keep getting so offended by our discussion. Because I'm tired of being harassed over it.
Let's just have a couple seconds of meta, right? So, did you take away anything new from our discussion today?
Yes, I understand. I feel as if I understand the crux of our disagreement. I was about to, like, whenever I was interrupting you at the end, it's because you were not taking my criticism. You wasn't understanding what my concerns were at all. So I was trying to interrupt you to keep you from, because you were getting really technical with this view that I don't actually hold, and not actually addressing my concerns, right? So it's something like this, JC. I feel like whenever we were talking about the aliens and the information on the piece of paper and how that information is objective if everyone goes extinct, like, that's what we were talking about. And you said something like I wanted to say something like, if we understand the human mind completely, then we can understand morality completely. And you agreed with me on this, right?
Sure.
So what I said after that, I said, listen, if we write this information down and every human being dies, I said that information still holds. And you said, no, JonJon, because what if we're dealing with a separate set of desires and tendencies via alien life, right? Now, I immediately tried to interrupt you and tried to explain to you that that's actually what I take issue with altogether, what you're doing, because you're just divorcing pragmatism, so to speak, and I'll explain.
Real quickly, though, who brought up the example, the I felt like I was just following with your thought experiment.
Yeah, it was my thought experiment.
So
but
was
I'm trying to
being
explain to you. No, listen, I'm trying to explain. Listen, you went off the rails by ignoring the fact that the information that we consider objective pertains to a very specific set of desires and tendencies. You completely ignored that, JC, and started talking about a different set of desires and tendencies and how they would not interpret it the same way. That's irrelevant, right? That's where me and you have a big disagreement. I think that what you're bringing forth as an objection is irrelevant because it's not dealing with the set of desires and tendencies that we derive the information from in the first place, right? So if we're talking about a very specific set of desires and tendencies, and we get information pertaining to that set of desires and tendencies, and then I say that we have objective truth about these desires and tendencies, it is not useful for you to then go ahead and divorce pragmatism, so to speak, and say, oh, well, what about these Martians who have a different set of desires and tendencies? They can put their hand on a stove and it might feel good for them. That doesn't take away from what I'm saying, because I'm talking about a very specific set of desires and tendencies, and this is why I invoke pragmatism, right?
So let's do this, okay? Do you think, because here's why I think we have an issue, is you seem to be packing information about a person's psychology into a moral judgment. So if I say, this is a typical moral judgment, okay? Forcing someone to touch hot coals is wrong, okay? Everybody's going to say that's true. Forcing someone to touch hot coals is wrong. What makes it wrong is the amount of pain. What gives you the amount of pain is a person's psychology, okay? Now, if there are no more people with our psychology, is that statement still true? Is the statement, write it down.
Well, whenever you say that, once again, you're divorcing pragmatism, right? Like, you're saying, what if people enjoyed acute agony? That's not interesting.
Why isn't that interesting?
Because I would consider, this is getting into the concept of health, right? Like, Sam Harris gets a lot of shit for the fact that the concept of health is changing, but we do place validity in that concept regardless, right? Like, for example, in the future, we might consider you unhealthy if you can't run a marathon at 200 years old, right? That doesn't take away from the concept of health today. So in other words, long story short, if somebody enjoys acute agony, then they are unhealthy, GHC, and I think you would agree with this, right? Like, if they have a healthy central nervous system, then they're going to experience acute agony, right? But if that's not the case, then sure, right?
Mhm.
But these are genetic mutations that are not to be taken into consideration, right? Like, if for some reason some weird baby in Africa is born and is able to set his hands on fire and he likes it, that's not going to take away from the objectivity that setting your hand on fire is morally wrong.
Why wouldn't that take away from it?
Because
Is it
when
wrong
we talk
for
about
him? Is it wrong for that person to light his hands on fire when he enjoys it?
Well, you got to take into consideration the key issue here is health, right? Like, if we have an unhealthy person who doesn't have who has a malfunctioning central nervous system, we're not going to apply his genetic makeup to the rest of the world. We're just going to say he's a genetic mutation. He's an exception to the rule. Like, what you're wanting to say is that if we have one baby in Africa who experiences pain and likes it, then therefore experiencing pain is morally, or setting somebody on fire being morally wrong no longer holds. I disagree with you.
Why? That's a counterexample to it. Like, it's a logical disproof of it. If you were to say that the number of planets is 8 and it's objectively true, however, once every 10 years there are 9 planets, right? Then it's actually not an objective truth that there are 8 planets.
Well, the reason what we're getting caught up in now is what we mean by a healthy brain, or what we mean by healthy. Like, for example, just to switch it up, what you're saying would be no different than saying this, right? Like, right now, as human beings, we've came to the conclusion, based off our ability to reason, that raping is morally bad, right? Now, you would probably agree with this, right? Do you? Do you agree that it is a universal truth that rape is bad?
Yeah.
All right. So but you're contradicting yourself now, because if I want to play devil's advocate, I could just do what you did and say something like this. I could say, well, GHC, we have this guy in Africa who thinks that rape is good, therefore you're wrong, right? That's the same reasoning and logic you just deployed onto me, and I'm deploying it onto you.
Well, right? if there's somebody who enjoys rape, right, then it's actually not wrong to rape that person. That's what I'm saying, and that seems like obviously true. Now, rape's kind of a funny case because it seems to involve...
but isn't that just getting into relativism though? Like, you're saying, well, it's all about the preferences. If this guy prefers this, then it's right.
That's subjectivism, not relativism.
No, that's cultural relativism.
What culture? Let's say this African guy was not a part of any culture.
Talk about Islam. We could talk about Islam. And in the Islamic culture,
Okay.
they treat gays and women terribly, right? So in your opinion,
do gay people
listen, in your opinion, based off of your subjectivism, you would say that you cannot say that the Muslim raping a little girl is morally wrong. You can't say that. Even though,
why?
like, you are being hypocritical, I think, now.
No, does the child enjoy being, like, raped and tortured?
No.
Okay, well then it's not true that it's right.
Well, but what if the person doing the raping thinks it's right?
Then they think it's right.
Is it right?
No, I don't have the belief that it is.
And I'm not asking what you think. Listen, what you're doing is playing with absolute truth now, right? You're trying to say something like, me as JHC, I can provide arguments, so to speak, for why it's wrong to rape little girls. But you want to shift, like, you want to go back on this. So I'm pretty sure you consider yourself capable of providing arguments for why rape is bad. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Rape is bad because, in general, right, my audience who I'm speaking to, if they're not convinced of this, I think that either they don't have the desire to cause harm to other people, or they don't have a belief that that raping kids causes harm. So what I can
Right.
try to do is I can try to provide information. This is what Sam Harris would do, and I'd show you. Let's take female genital mutilation, because this is a topic that Harris and I are going to agree
Okay.
on. Okay. Now,
Yeah.
either these Muslims think that they're performing the will of God, in which case they have a bad belief because Allah never existed, right? And Muhammad was a piece of shit. We agree on that. We would
Yeah.
we would correct them on their belief. Hey, you shouldn't do this, because if the reason you're doing this and you think that it's right is because Allah told you, then you have a bad belief. Okay? Now, if somebody is doing it because they have a desire to cause little girls harm, I'm not going to try to argue with them and say, you should value the lives of little girls, right?
I disagree with you.
What-
That's ridiculous.
How would
That's
you
absolutely
argue?
ridiculous.
How would you argue with a psychopath, JonJon?
Well, there's an exception, right? Like, notice how you're invoking psychopathy as a defeater for what I'm talking about. That's not the right way to conceptualize these issues, right?
Why?
Like, for example, whenever we discover these moral truths, we do this because of our ability to reason, right? Our reason bypasses or supersedes our biases and bigotry, right? So in other words, what this boils down to is something like, I think Sam Harris might have said this a while ago. He said, what kind of evidence could we provide to convince somebody if they don't value logic or reasoning, right? So in other words, if this psychopath doesn't value truth, if this psychopath does not value logic or reasoning, then yes,
No.
I agree with you, right?
Hold on.
So
They
once
do-
again, JHC, we would consider these people unhealthy, right? If you don't value reason, because my interpretation is this, that we don't have free will, and if
That's not what
if you
psychopaths
do,
are. Hold on. Psychopaths are eminently logical, right? They don't feel empathy towards their victims. They don't care about causing harm.
Yeah, but we consider these people
They're
unhealthy.
they're perfectly logical, right? That's not their problem.
I disagree with you.
What are
Like,
they
the reason
illogical
why-
about, JonJon?
Well, it might not be that they're being illogical, but they don't see the bigger picture based off their psychopathy. In other words, they are
What are they
unhealthy,
missing?
right? They're unhealthy.
So what?
Well, for example, I consider being unhealthy like a lack of character, a lack of morality. If you're extremely selfish, like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, for example, psychopaths have to keep moving. It's actually not in their best interest to be a psychopath, right? Because if you're a psychopath and other people find out you're a psychopath, you have to keep moving because you'll get demonized in your society. So it's against your own well-being to be a psychopath.
Okay, great.
This is what I'm just saying. It's unhealthy.
So what you're saying is that psychopaths shouldn't be psychopaths because somebody could find them out and they could actually do something to them that they do care about, like restricting them in a prison. Right? Is that what you're saying?
I'm just trying to say that something that me and you are probably not going to be able to come to the meeting of minds about is the concept of health and how that applies to our discussion. Like,
well,
I
just don't
believe
think
that
it matters. So
like,
let's say
I think I'll tell you why it matters just within 5 seconds. It's because we need healthy brains to value reason and logic.
yeah, but what if they don't care about reason or logic?
Then whenever I go to persuade them, morally speaking, it's not going to be a productive pursuit.
Right. You won't be able to give them because they don't have the desire to be logical, right? So is it the case?
Yeah, but that's not a defeater, is it?
It is, because they don't have any responsibility. Why would they if let's just take somebody who doesn't care about pain, they don't care about logic and reasoning, right? They're like the ultimate psychopath plus irrational person, okay? Now you have the option to try to convince them not to be that way. What could you possibly say that they're going to care about?
Hold on, ask that again. I fucked up and looked at the chat. People are talking shit again. But go ahead. I'll stop looking at it.
Let's take the ultimate psychopath, one that doesn't feel any empathy for other people, nor do they have any concern for their own well-being. Okay, this person is completely suicidal, whatever, right? But they're let's say they're caught, right? They're in a padded room. Now, JonJon and Sam Harris, psychologists extraordinaire, moral philosophers, are enlisted to try to convince him otherwise. What are we going to say to this guy who doesn't care about his own well-being, who doesn't care about other people?
What am I trying to convince him of?
To be a moral person, to be objectively moral. What fact are you going to bring out?
Well, I would explain. Well, just me personally, take into consideration that I've already said before that if we're dealing with somebody who doesn't value logic or reasoning, then there's not a whole lot we can do. It's an open question on what we should do.
So there's no fact of the matter. Is it wrong for him?
But hold on. I can answer your question though, right? What we would do is we would obviously educate him on the idea that it's unusual and it's not normal for him to have these feelings.
Yeah, why would he care about it? Why would he care about if he's in the statistical norm?
Well, he would care about it because me and Sam Harris would explain to him that these are unhealthy views in the sense that this is abnormality.
He doesn't care about health.
Well, then, if this is the case, JHC, hold on, my neighbor's dog just came over. I gotta mute really quick. Hold on, I'm just gonna walk up front so you don't have to hear all my hunting dogs go nuts. But yeah, me and Sam Harris in this scenario, what we would do is we would just simply we would be able to do this. I think we would be able to convince this guy that he's an abnormality in terms of his desires and tendencies. So it's not normal. So for example, if somebody is born and they think it's okay to kill everyone, right, and rape everything, we would do this. We'd have the same strategy on that person as well. We would say, listen, man, I understand you have these desires and tendencies, but you're unhealthy, and here's why.
Yeah, but this guy doesn't care about health. Convince him to care about his own personal well-being.
Well, like, I take huge issue with this because, like, you already agreed, JHC, that there are universal truths about morality, right?
Well, I'm saying that what Sam Harris means by objective is universal.
Well, I'm asking. Let's not worry about Sam Harris. I'm just trying to come to the meeting of minds with you.
Yeah, I think that this guy could possibly exist. I don't know if he does or not, but
hold on. So you don't confuse me.
This psychopath who doesn't care.
You do agree. Hold on. You do agree that you do believe in universal morality, right?
Sure. Yeah, I do. But I still think that the
thought experiments can be run. I still think we can go over. I'm going to show you my issues here, right? Like, you don't take this shit serious. Like, this objection that you're bringing forth as a defeater, you don't actually think is a defeater, is what I'm trying to explain to you.
Well, I do think it's a defeater. I just don't think that it's actual.
Like, you don't think it's practical.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so,
I don't know of anybody like this.
But I've always said that, right? I've always said that if we divorce pragmatism, it's not interesting. That's what you're doing. You're divorcing pragmatism.
But this is why this sounds so funny now, though, because all you're saying is that morality is objective unless the wrong type of person comes around. And now it's subjective.
No, that's what you're saying. That's exactly what you're saying. So, for example, you already agreed that morality is universal. But guess what? What if I give birth to a kid who thinks killing is okay? You are trying to say that morality is no longer universal because of this one-off fucking crazy person.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you're contradicting yourself, though.
No, it's not. I'm not saying it's necessary.
Both ways.
Yeah, I can. I can say that right now it's universal, and if a counterexample comes along, then it would cease being universal. That's not a problem.
Listen,
it's a problem for objectivity.
But the issue, no, hold on. The issue is that these counterexamples aren't hypothetical. They actually exist in the real world.
Okay, well then great. Then it's not universal. Then I will be empirically corrected on this.
So whenever you say, all right, so I'm just making sure that I got you there. You already acknowledged it.
Yeah.
So whenever you say that you believe in
there's somebody-
universal, well, hold on. Whenever you say you believe in universal morality, what you really meant to say is I don't believe in universal morality because of psychopaths.
Well, I don't think. Again,
fuck.
what I said, right, isn't psychopath simpliciter. I said that this is a type of psychopath that doesn't care about personal well-being, which is different. Psychopaths don't have empathy for other people, but I said this
Well,
is
I mean, it doesn't have to be a psychopath. We could just say it's a person who likes to kill people.
Well, that's a little bit
Do you
different.
really think? Do you really think, GHC,
Can I explain why?
that
Can I explain
that's
why I
a-
added
yeah, go
this?
ahead.
I added this proviso that he doesn't care about personal well-being, because if he does care about personal well-being, then you can actually reason with him, and you can say, if you keep killing people, you're going to go to prison, and you don't want to go to prison, so therefore you shouldn't kill people. Now,
Right.
I added he doesn't have any concerns for his personal well-being, so that you couldn't counter me so simply. I said, here's a logically possible person. He doesn't care about his own well-being. The only reason he's alive right now and he hasn't jumped in front of traffic is because he's been captured and placed in a padded room. Now, to this person, there's no reasoning with somebody who doesn't have preferences about his personal well-being, right?
Yeah.
So, this is not a typical psychopath. My view that morality, or at least there are some universal moral truths, is not, in fact, defeated by the existence of psychopaths, but it would be by this sort of person.
I guess I agree with you, but it's not really. It's
Right,
not
but
really.
if you agree
I
with
just
me,
don't think it's that interesting.
well, it might
Like,
not
for
be
example,
interesting
you're just saying that within this guy's logical framework, there is no such thing as universal morality because he doesn't value logic. That's not that interesting.
Well, not just forget logic for a second. Let's talk about he has the ability to reason, but he doesn't care about his own personal well-being, right? He's like the ultimate suicidal person. He's just been captured.
But why don't you just agree with me and Sam Harris then? Whenever me and Sam Harris, we would just consider that guy unhealthy. Why wouldn't you just do the same?
Because asking if he's healthy or not answers a different question. Namely, is he healthy?
No. Whenever we like mental health, not just like physical health.
Well, what do you mean by unhealthy?
Like, this is what I was trying to explain to you, that what we're gonna have an issue with what we mean by health now, right?
Mm-hmm. By healthy, do you mean well, actually, let's take a step back, because maybe we don't actually have to.
What if I just said health just means relatively normal central nervous system?
Sure. Yeah, he doesn't have that. He doesn't have that. Yep, this guy does not have that. So if all you're telling him,
so we would consider him unhealthy.
Yeah. So we tell this guy that you have an abnormal.
But just really quick, this is actually extremely pragmatic. Like, this is actually how we would use the word unhealthy. Like, we would literally consider this guy unhealthy in real life. We would probably put him up in a psych ward or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. There's no reasoning with him. There's no fact that we could present him that would change his mind.
So the real question is, are you going to take issue with the semantics of health?
No. Here's what I would do. No, I won't. I'll leave the health. I'll agree with you that he's unhealthy. Okay. Here's what I would say. If we want to fix this guy, there's no presentation of facts we can give him. We actually need to rewire his brain and change his desires. He's not going to, there isn't going to be anything that's true or false to him about morality until we change his sets of desires. Now, if what is required of someone in order to participate in a moral community is that they have their brains wired a certain way, well, then guess what? There's no such thing as pain is bad simpliciter. By that, I mean simply and without qualification. Okay? What it means is that this guy has to have the right kind of attitudes towards things like pain and well-being for himself in order to have the sort of moral system that Sam Harris wants. And if that's the case, then look, morality depends on his psychology. Great. Everybody can agree with that. Morality is subjective. Now, it might be universal in the sense that, as far as we know, there are no people who have no regard for their own well-being. Fine, it's universal until somebody like this comes along. And then it's not really universal, but it tends to be the norm, right? That's how we would deal with that situation. That's how we do it with psychopaths, right, of an extreme sort. We say, this means that whether or not somebody holds a particular moral judgment as true depends on their psychological states. That's the conclusion that we find from psychopaths. But that's okay.
That's just relativism.
No, it's subjectivism. The truth of a moral judgment.
I don't think we're on the same page whenever we talk
truth,
about what
the
moral
truth
and
of a
cultural
moral
relativism is.
The truth of a moral judgment depends on someone's attitudes towards them. That's what being a subjectivist means. That an agent's
That's not true, though. Like
we just went over this though, and we found out that it's true.
It's trivially true in a sense, but it's not true whenever you take into consideration what we're talking about whenever we talk about universal morality. Like, you're just taking the relativist route and saying something like this, like all these fucking idiots say, right? Where they're like, well, it's all about the preferences. So if this person has a certain set of preferences, then it is true for him because he has these desires. That's just ridiculous. That is a terrible line of thinking.
But that we just demonstrated that it's true. That the only reason
I gave you a counterexample in which you disagreed with, right? I told you, what if we're talking about Islam? What if we're talking about some dude who thinks it's okay to rape people? Do you understand that based off your reasoning, we would say that as long as this guy thinks it's okay to rape infants, then it is okay to rape infants. That's what your reasoning is. This is cultural relativism.
No, I don't have the view. Well, for one, it wouldn't be cultural relativism.
Well, let me correct. It's true for him, right? Let me correct myself. It's true for him that rape is good. That's not interesting for somebody to point that out, right?
No, actually, I think it is.
Universal aspect
I think that there are people who actually think that they ought to rape children, right? I think that there are those people. I think there have to be those people. What else explains why they do it? Do you think that they?
Yeah, but the issue is that you're not. So I think you may have been a little bit dishonest here whenever you said you're not going to take issue, semantically speaking, with the concept of health, because that's exactly what you're doing now.
What am I taking issue
I'll
with?
ask you the same question I asked you earlier. Why do you take issue? Why don't you disagree with me and Sam Harris? Or why don't you just agree with me and Sam Harris?
On what specifically?
So for the example I just gave, if we have a guy who thinks it's morally right to rape and kill children, we would consider him unhealthy, but not you. What you would do is you would say something like, well, the fact that this guy exists is a defeater for universal morality. That's what you're trying to say. And you're trying to say the reason is because you're just completely ignoring the fact that me and Sam Harris would consider him unhealthy, which you already agreed with, right? You already agreed that we would consider him unhealthy. So
yeah. I would say that
a little bit dishonest.
I don't think I'm being dishonest. I would agree with you that he's unhealthy.
Well, it has to be one or the other, right? Like, for example,
what do you mean?
Whenever we say he is unhealthy, that's just another way of us saying that he is incapable of discovering moral truths, right?
No, it's not.
Well, whenever we talk about universal morality, he is incapable of discovering these universal truths.
Look, if what we mean
rape is bad.
If what we mean,
do you agree with that though? Don't just skip what I just said. Do you agree?
I'm not skipping it. I'm going to explain because you're asking me to give a blanket statement.
Hold on, just pay attention. No, pay attention.
But you asked me a question. I want to answer it real quick.
Yeah, but you're not really addressing my concerns. I'm trying to explain to you that you agree that universal.
How do you know?
Just let me finish this, because that way I know for a fact you're going to address my concerns. What I'm saying is that you have already acknowledged that universal morality is a thing, right? You fucked up, GHC, because you acknowledge that rape is bad, right? That raping people is bad is universal. you acknowledge this, and then you flip-flop on your views.
I didn't say that
immediately by
raping
saying,
people is universally wrong, JonJon. I said
so what
I'm
do you
on
think
board
universal morality is?
that there are some things that are held across the board by every single human being that is undesirable. I didn't say literally all things that anybody thinks are wrong for everyone. I didn't say that.
So yeah, so as long as whenever a vast majority of interlocutors come to the conclusion based off reason that raping a child is infringing on their well-being, therefore it is morally wrong. Whenever we come to that conclusion, you think that a psychopath enjoying rape is a defeater, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, but what does like I said, me and Sam Harris would consider him unhealthy, right? Like
Yeah,
we've
I
already
would consider him
acknowledged.
unhealthy too.
Yes, we already. Yeah, but the problem is that you're refusing to acknowledge the mechanism in which we come to these conclusions, which is our ability to reason, right? And these people that are unhealthy don't have that ability, right?
What? Yeah, they do. They just don't feel empathy. They have the ability to reason. They just don't care about the well-being of other people. Right? I'm
Yeah,
not
but I've
going to
already
reason
explained
with
to
a
you-
psychopath.
but I already, my response to that was that this is this is infringing on his own well-being, right?
Why would he care about that?
Well, why would you be bringing this up whenever we're trying to talk about our ability to reason our way into these moral truths? Why would you bring up a guy?
Because there are
who is
people who you
nihilistic?
can't. There are people who you cannot reason with, morally speaking,
Yeah, but
because they have bad
I've already
desires.
acknowledged that. I've already acknowledged that. But whenever you say bad desires, me and Sam Harris would just consider them unhealthy.
No. He has desire to do bad things, right? Not bad desires per se. I understand what you mean.
Well,
but
in
that's
this
a little
scenario you're
separate.
giving, this guy, you act like this guy would just walk out in front of a speeding bus and kill himself. Like he just doesn't care about anything.
Oh, that was the second person I brought up. Yes, the
Yeah, but the reason
super
why this isn't
psychopath.
interesting, the reason why this isn't interesting is because we would literally just chop them down to unhealthy people and continue about our business in terms of reasoning our way into these moral truths.
Yeah, but all you're
Like-
saying now, hold on. All you're saying now is that universal morality or objective morality is just all those people who don't have this kind of psychology. That's all you're saying, and that's
I'm
a
saying that it's
subjectivist position.
I'm
If you
just
want to,
appealing-
if you want to leave out super psychopaths and normal psychopaths and say they're not a counterexample because they have bad psychology, right? Then all you're saying is that the moral community of which we reason with are just people with a certain set of psychology. That literally is a definition of subjectivist ethics. I'm agreeing with
Right.
you. The way that we would deal with these sorts of people, let's say there's a psychopath who could not control his inhibitions and acted on every single desire to kill people around him. Right? We would both agree we just lock him up, right? We just have to make sure he can't kill people anymore. There's no sense in which he's doing something wrong from his perspective. There's just no
I
way.
agree with
He just
that.
doesn't care.
I agree with that.
Right? He doesn't care about well-being of other people, whatever. Right? You just lock him up. Is that a counterexample to objective morality? Yeah, it seems to be. Seems to be because it shows that in order to be motivated by moral reasons, you have to have a certain kind of psychology, right? Having a certain kind of psychology in order for something to be true is just the definition of subjectivity. Compare that to objective propositions that are true no matter what somebody thinks about them. The number of planets is eight no matter what a psychopath thinks about him. If he doesn't care about planets, doesn't matter, there's still 8 of them. If he loves planets, doesn't matter, there's still 8 of them. The same thing.
I think I understand what you're saying now. You're just drawing the distinction between universal and objective. You're saying, yeah, it's universal, but it is not objective.
Yes.
Yeah, I understand. I mean,
and I agree. I can agree with everything else that Sam Harris can say. So let's go back, right, to Sam Harris and say, look, Sam Harris, you can still shit on cultural relativists all you want, right?
Yeah, I hope
You can
so.
still shit on Islam because you know what? Little girls prefer not to have their clits cut off. Okay?
Oh, fuck.
They prefer that. They don't
Yeah.
have a desire to do it. They don't enjoy it. It hurts them. Now, well-formed
Oh,
humans
shit.
have empathy for other people, right? All I'm doing is I'm listing out their psychology, right? I'm not
Yeah, but whenever
listing out
whenever you
facts.
said well-formed humans, that's
healthy.
just me and Sam Harris saying healthy.
Yeah, it's healthy. Yep, it is. And by healthy, in this case, what we mean are people with a certain kind of psychological dispositions, right?
But I have to say, JC, me and Sam Harris agree with this though. Like this isn't like we would agree philosophically speaking that like the issue here is that we believe it's definitely a semantic issue over objective. And what it is,
Yes.
you're wanting to say something like it cannot be objective because every single human being doesn't agree with this, and therefore it is not subjective.
Well, let's rephrase that a little bit. Saying that because not everybody agrees with it is actually going to be a counterexample to the universality of morality.
Oh fuck.
Okay. Now,
Oh shit.
the reason why I think that psychopathy is a counterexample to objectivity is because I think that the common sense understanding of the scenario is that because the motivational states of a psychopath are such that they understand what they ought to do in ways different from us because, like you and Sam Harris would say, they're unhealthy. Having mental unhealth is a psychological state. He has bad psychology. That's why he thinks like it's permissible. Maybe he even believes it's obligatory to torture people, right? He's a psychopath. He does not care. He does not have a desire to not cause pain and suffering to people around him, right? He actually has the other desire. He wants to cause as much pain and suffering as he can to them, and he enjoys it. The best explanation is that our understanding of obligations are generated by our desires, our psychological states. Luckily, most of us are not psychopaths, and those people that aren't, we call unhealthy, and we try to separate. Thoroughly naturalistic, it's thoroughly scientific. This is a view that naturalizes it, and I don't need all of the import of objectivity. I don't need it. I have a perfect explanation. I still get to call Islam bad, right? Still get to call female genital mutilation bad. You can have all that still. What I don't have to do now is prove that obligations exist independent of people's minds. I don't want that kind of burden of proof, and I don't need it to make my case.
I would disagree with you there. Like, I agree with a lot of what you're saying in terms of it cannot be objective because not every human concludes these conclusions. I agree with that part. But what I disagree with is that it is like whenever I say it's subjective, and whenever me and Sam Harris invoke objective, that's not what we mean, right? What we mean is that there are some right and wrong answers to the question of well-being. And whenever you raise your objections, we just chop it down to unhealthy central nervous systems. So whenever I gave the example of if we completely understood the human body, if we completely understood neuroscience and our biology, then we would still have objective conclusions in terms of healthy membranes concluding morality. So whenever you say something like, well, if we have an alien civilization that has a different set of desires and tendencies and thinks it's okay to kill people, it doesn't take away from the information we garnered about the vast majority of healthy central nervous systems coming to these conclusions.
Well, and what if there are more aliens than there are people? Does it then?
Well, like I said before, this is whenever we would invoke pragmatism. We would say that we're dealing with a very specific set of desires and tendencies, and that we're not actually contemplating numerous sets of desires and tendencies and comparing them. We're actually just contemplating human beings not the entire universe and all life.
Right, but you would agree with me that if humans had a different psychology, then different things would be right or wrong, right?
Yes, but just to add something to that, it would have to be like whenever you say if human beings had a different psychology, we would have to say human beings, a majority of human beings have a different psychology, because
Yeah,
I'm
let's
appealing
say
to
all of them.
popularity here, right?
Well, here, let's say this. Let's say a nuclear bomb goes off in the atmosphere, right? And it changes everybody's brains such that, actually their entire body, that now they enjoy radiation poisoning, right? It actually sustains them. It gives them energy, okay? Now, assuming that one has a desire to live as long as possible relatively painlessly, seems like one has an obligation to be in the vicinity of radiation, because now this actually sustains us and lets us live longer. Okay? So that's what's happening in this weird scenario. Now, do you think, John, you know that it would be true then? Is it true right now that we all have an obligation to hang around uranium and radiation right this second?
I wouldn't say you have an obligation, no.
Right. Because the sort of person who understands the effects of radiation right now on their own body and psychology, right? Those sorts of people are actually going to have an obligation to avoid it because it causes pain and suffering. So, our subjective mental states, right? Meaning referring to a particular agent, John's propensity to be harmed by radiation means he has an obligation to avoid it. However, future John, with a different type of body, different kind of, well, same sets of desires, but he has an obligation to hang around radiation, right? So, is
Yeah.
it objectively true that just without qualification is the moral judgment one ought to avoid radiation? Is that true or false?
I would say it's true. And this new hypothetical.
Right, but
Like
I'm talking about
if you're saying that the well-being of conscious creatures is actually dramatically increased all of a sudden, then yeah, that would follow.
Great. So now sometimes people ought to hang around uranium, some people ought not to. Is it objectively true that one ought to avoid radiation? And the answer is obviously
No.
it depends what their bodies are like. It depends what their psychologies are like. That's it, right?
Yeah.
It
So
depends.
just to make it clear, just to be clear here, you actually agree with about 99% of what Sam Harris is saying.
I probably agree with everything. It's just what he calls it, right? That's what I'm saying.
Right.
This is a verbal dispute.
What's funny is that forgive me for segueing just a little bit, but what's funny is that he has the same issue with other philosophers about free will, about like the word free. Like him and Dan Dennett have clashed so many times. Like you might have been familiar with the emails, how they were going at each other, like taking shots at each other. And they literally just can't get over what they should call it. That's it. They agree on everything, right? Like Dan Dennett will say things to Sam Harris like, listen, Sam, I think you're a compatibilist. And then they'll have a discussion where they agree on everything. They agree that they have moral responsibility. They agree that determinism holds, but they just cannot agree on what to fucking call it, right? It's very similar to the issue that we're having here. Kind of.
Right. So now, if we take stock, right? So Dennett and Harris, they agree on all the facts. One of them probably wants to call it compatibilism. Another one wants to call it like determinism, right? I assume that's where they are. I'm not really up on their exchange, but I know Dennett's a compatibilist, and he thinks that we do have free will, but in a sense that's compatible with determinism.
Sam
And
Harris.
Sam Harris
So
probably
I can
thinks that we
No, I
don't
can
have
explain
free
it to
will.
you. The issue within 10 seconds, right? The issue that Sam Harris has is the semantics with free. He thinks that whenever Dan Dennett, because Dan Dennett and Sam Harris both agree that that you don't have the ability to do otherwise, right? They both
Mhm.
agree with that. But Sam Harris feels, and I think Sam Harris is in the right to feel this way. Like I don't take issue with him feeling this way. Sam Harris feels like the word free invokes freedom and the ability to do otherwise, right? So whenever Dan Dennett says we have free will, he's like Sam Harris just feels he's saying we have the ability to do otherwise because the word free implies freedom, right? So that's what Sam Harris, that's why Sam Harris gets his panties in a bunch whenever like the compatibilists say they have free will. It's literally a semantic dispute because Sam Harris feels like it's unwarranted to invoke free.
Right, and
Like
it's
for
because
example, we should just say we have will instead of free will or something like that.
what do you think of Sam Harris's position on that? Do you think he's right?
I agree. Yeah, I agree. I feel, yeah, absolutely. I feel like we don't have the ability to do otherwise, and I feel like whenever you say freedom, that invokes the ability to do otherwise.
Right. Now, I'm not trying to play getcha, right? Don't you think that by saying morality is objective in the same way that the number of planets is 8 is objective is also misleading?
Oh, fuck. Oh, shit. Yeah, it is actually. But my excuse was concept revision. Gotta love them semantics. Like maybe we can invoke concept revision on the compatibilist version of free will as well.
Maybe
And
we
just
could,
say that,
but do you think we
just say that
could
this isn't what
right
we
now?
need.
So we could hope for that in the
to be
future,
honest with
right?
you, Dan Dennett might actually be doing that. Dan Dennett might actually be engaging in concept revision because keep in mind, he doesn't think we have the ability to do otherwise, but he still invokes free in the word free will. So he's engaging in concept revision himself. He's saying, listen, we can still keep the word free will and interpret it more in a more healthy way, if that makes any sense.
Sure. Now, do you think...
but you made a very good point. I agree with you that it's...
So let's... I'm not going to force you to say anything going forward, JonJon, but here's what we could do, okay? I think you kind of understand why at least some philosophers get their panties in a bunch when Harris talks about morality the same way that scientists talk about the number.
Yeah, one thing I took away from our discussion today is that I absolutely sympathize with people attacking Sam Harris now. I actually have a better understanding of why it is they take such an issue with his semantics. It does make sense. I agree with your criticisms. In the same way that I agree with Sam Harris's criticisms of Dan Dennett's word free will.
I'm happy with that then.
Yeah, I mean, we usually have productive conversations whenever we clash.
Good job, JHC.
Yeah, JC is the real MVP, man. JC, what if I told you everyone in here thinks you're top dog?
Oh, I wouldn't agree with you.
Oh, fuck. Who in here challenges that? Who in here wants to challenge that? JHC. Who in here thinks they can beat JHC in a philosophical debate?
Well, JonJon, I don't think I'm a very good debater. I think, unfortunately, I'm closer to like Yaniv, where I win like the 2-hour-long, drawn-out battle of attrition.
Yeah, dude, that's hilarious. Yaniv is bad about that. He's too nice sometimes. I remember I got Yaniv to go into the